Welcome back. You're listening to the Dynasty Market Watch, where yesterday's price is not today's price, presented by the Bulletproof family of podcasts. I'm Todd Halverson. I'm joined by Brian O'Leary and Matt Davis. Typically, we have a nice structured podcast with these pretty little segments, and we're all prepared. Today, we're just talking ball, baby. We're just talking some football. So this is Brian's worst nightmare. I could hear the concern tone in his text as we were discussing this week's episode. So this week we're going unscripted, unfiltered, unedited, just all the uns. This is what we're doing this week. This was my idea. So if it goes sour, I'm gonna have to wear this.
This is uncalled for.
Yeah. So we're gonna see where this one goes. We're gonna see some rabbit trails. I would preface and tell you what we're going to talk about, but I don't know yet. So we're just going to find out here in a few minutes. But without further ado, Brian, play that Fat Joe.
Yesterday's price is not today's price. Why?
So at night, whenever we get the kids in bed, I'm going to keep PG, just don't worry. But at night, whenever we get the kids in bed, we're just like hanging out, watching TV. I'm on my phone, probably fighting with people online about Rome Odunze. And my wife will turn to me and be like, so what do you want to talk about? And every time she asks me that question, I'm like, can you start the conversation? So I'm going to just turn it to Matt and say, Matt, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think it's a good time for this subject matter, just an open discussion, because I feel like that's how everybody is, like on Twitter and in group chats. It's like until the combine, until free agency, there's just no news. So, I mean, I have like a theory that February is pretty much like the worst month for football discourse on Twitter, on the app. Because, I mean, everybody's just coming up with terrible takes, I think, just to pass time, etc. But speaking of take that was not, I wouldn't say terrible, but a lot of a polarizing topic this week was Drake Maye, and he's getting picked apart. And
okay.
I know our friend Mike, Dynasty Zoltan, he's done, a lot of the actual homework. Other people are just kind of saying hot takes. But Brian, you've noticed the Drake Maye conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we talked about for me a lot last week, and I think it's a little bit of prospect fatigue. He isn't a perfect player. I think he's maybe being slightly diminished because people are excited about Jaden Daniels. To me, that Jaden Daniels and Drake Maye are mutually exclusive. Like, they don't, just because Jaden Daniels is good or bad or people are excited about him, shouldn't move Drake Maye down. And I don't think Mike's saying that necessarily. Yeah. But like Mike specifically, he's the biggest doubter I've seen. He brought up a lot of missed throws or bad footwork or this or that, and he would show clips. And to me, it's sure, I can also pull up a lot of clips of awesome plays, game-changing plays, QB1 type plays that I could change that narrative pretty quickly if I wanted to post a clip of threads as well. So like a thread of clips as well. So like, to me, it's kind of, I'll let people start knocking him down for sure, but he hasn't changed from a couple months ago. So unless you are recently diving into tape like Mike, don't just go one way or the other. It shouldn't have changed unless you've really dove in a little bit more.
Yeah, one thing with the pocket passers, I feel like they don't have the rushing to fall back on from a hot take standpoint. For like Jaden Daniels. Okay, Jaden Daniels makes some bad throws on film and people, knock him for it. Oh, but he rushes a lot. Okay, so he gets a pass. The pocket passers don't have that like fallback option in their profile on tape. So it's just like any bad throw just makes it almost insurmountable for them to overcome. And so I just feel like those types of guys get knocked really hard by people evaluating, unless you have like the Joe Burrow 60 touchdown pass season, or you've just been proclaimed a transcendent prospect like a Trevor Lawrence or Caleb Williams. So these like Justin Herbert a few years ago when he was coming out, very similar type of debate of, oh, he's not the people were talking about like how a lot of his passes were like short A dot, things like that. And people just knock these guys that are pocket passers. And I think we've been talking about it the last few weeks, like the 105, 106. Those picks are sweet because we're talking about Neighbors and Bowers. It's about to turn into Drake Maye. I think by the end of this, Drake Maye's going like 105, 106.
See, I don't think that I don't agree with, but I mean, I could definitely be wrong. But like, it's important
People
to remember.
People are so excited about Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, I just feel like they're going to push him up.
It's important to remember that NFL. I don't see that without Drake Maye falling in real life. Like, if I expect him to go number 2 to Washington and maybe 3 to the Patriots at the latest, I would be very shocked if he doesn't get picked in the top 3. And I think
he goes to the Patriots. That's a problem.
Well, I don't really. No, I don't agree with that actually. Like, the Patriots are not my favorite landing spot, but like if he's Josh Allen,
they got to be the worst landing spot. Name a worse landing spot than the Patriots. They don't have a hot commodity offensive coach. Their offensive line is just hot dog water. Do they have a receiver that's worth anything? They have a tight end.
Wasn't the Texans a bad landing spot? Yeah, like the Texans were a bad landing spot last year. Like, landing spots can change pretty drastically, pretty quickly.
The Bills were a terrible landing spot for Josh Allen like 5 years ago, and like people didn't like the McDermott hire.
Well, it wasn't a very good spot. I mean, getting Stephon Diggs, like getting some stuff around him. I'm just talking about like immediately, because here's the thing: if you don't have that first year success, you're going to lose value. So you're drafting this guy, whoever the quarterback is, as a back end second round startup player, maybe early third.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make an argument either side of this. Like, Bryce Young for sure, like, lost quite a bit of value in a bad landing spot. Potentially, you could argue that anyways.
Bryce Young sucks, like.
But you could make that argument about Drake Maye. I guess my point is, like, you could say he sucks. Like, that's what Mike would say, or other people that I've seen on Twitter now. What I think is kind of interesting about this draft class, and I could be totally wrong, I just get a gut feeling. We always talk about like drafting like based on like value and talent over position. I think people are going to, after 101, kind of like draft by what position they want. Like, I don't see a lot of people just because Jaden Daniels is there at 104 passing on like Neighbors or something like that. If they really want like a sexy receiver, I could see each league's draft board kind of moving from 102 to 106 quite a bit. Maybe
102, like the 105 or 106 could be really congested on the ADP. Yeah, it might show that Drake Maye is the 103 ADP, but on an average basis, they're probably going to be all pretty close together.
Yeah, I just like, if there's someone like picking at 102, 103, 104 that has two quarterbacks that they like, for example, already in a super flex league, I don't see them double tapping and wanting another quarterback. They're going to say, oh, I want Bowers because he's this special tight end, or Neighbors because maybe I like him more than Marvin Harrison Jr., or he's the special guy, or whatever the case is.
People are so excited about Neighbors.
Yes. It's funny. I don't want to get into this yet, but I do have one of my notes that I know you guys didn't want to have notes, but I wanted to get into some receivers that are like less talked about, and just more than anything, like kind of get names on people's radars to kind of do their own research and check things out. Don't just trust your favorite analysts. Do a little digging yourself. So that's something that I want us to get into at some point. But before we do that, I also think it's worthwhile to kind of mention, we're talking about Drake Maye, we're talking about Jaden Daniels. I think JJ McCarthy is getting enough publicity.
Steam is coming. He is getting. I mean, so we were talking about JJ McCarthy just as we were talking about different players that are hot topics right now, and immediately as we were talking about that, my brother texted me and said, JJ McCarthy is going to go in the top 10, isn't he? And so like that is like it's starting to circulate that the steam is coming. And JJ McCarthy, like his volume and his raw numbers, I think in like your home type leagues is going to get some stank to him. But in leagues where there's a little bit sharper players, I think he's going to be like the hard consensus 108, and maybe even above that once the draft comes around. Like if he goes, was it Daniel Jeremiah mock where he went 108 to the Falcons or 8th?
I think he went 108 to the Falcons. And
if that happens,
people that know are pretty connected are even suggesting the Giants at 6 are looking at QB, Falcons at 8. Then you have, I mean, the Jets at 10 probably aren't, but I mean, they probably should be. Then Minnesota at 11, Broncos at 12, Raiders at 13. He's going in the top 13. Like
someone's probably going to trade up, knowing that they have to get him before then.
Almost the only counter argument to him going like top 12, top 13 that I can even think of is like this time last year, Will Levis was like in the 101 discussion. There was like a Houston beat reporter saying that the Texans really loved him and et cetera, et cetera. So
that also Will Levis sucked his final year in college. So if you can read into that, like JJ McCarthy didn't have high volume, but he was very good with the volume. He was very.
I don't know how much that matters.
It's a data point.
Like he was always going to be a traits based selection.
Well, I guess my point is, to me, Will Levis is a more volatile player. Like JJ McCarthy, and again, this might be a system-based thing in college that maybe it doesn't translate, but Will Levis was very high, very low, very few in between in college.
Also playing in the SEC with, he's on Kentucky. Like he didn't have like the best supporting cast.
Sure.
Will Levis, he was such a hot commodity there for like 2 weeks during the season. What's he worth to y'all in draft capital right now?
Can you play the Matt clip from, I don't know, a couple months ago where he like is slamming on the table like he's fucking good? Like that was the statement that cracks me up.
I still think he's good. I'm a
Titans fan, so I hope he's good.
I probably like the latest of first, like a 112, but that even seems higher than what he's going in startups. Isn't he like an early 7th round?
He's going in the 7th in startups. So Dynasty Data Lab, which is made by Adeiko, Adeiko on Twitter. He's actually in the Bulletproof Discord, one of the analysts, but he has an ADP site, dynastydatalab.com. So go check that out, where you have sleeper ADP from real leagues. And in that, Will Levis is going in the 7th round. So he's
and that's probably right after where
the end of the 7th. I got him in the 7th of a startup.
Yeah,
a couple weeks ago. So I think that's
I think he's
right for him.
Yeah, I think he's a right shot to take there. Like I'd rather have him than, Derek Carr,
Baker, Kirk Cousins, Stafford, or the ones around him.
I'd rather take a shot because for the same reason I was taking a shot a couple months ago. I mean, if he's gonna hit, he's gonna hit big. And
is it not a coin flip for you, Matt? If it's like a very strong win now team, if you need a QB2, like a Stafford versus him?
No, I'd still take Levis because I feel like you can always get those guys. Like,
I agree. That was my first thought. My first thought was I would rather have Levis. And worst case scenario, if I've got to trade something late in the year, like for the trade deadline or as we get into the playoffs, I can make that.
Yeah, like someone who's not contending is going to have a QB that you can get your hands on. But I mean, like the owner even specifically said in writing when they released Mike Vrabel that they have a very young, talented QB that they want to build around. So it sounds like he has like at least a vote of confidence for one more year. I do not expect Tennessee to be in this JJ McCarthy sweepstakes, even though they're sitting there at number 7.
They might trade back. They could trade back.
They could trade back. They could get offensive line. They
might need to get to 7 to get JJ McCarthy. And if that happens, back to JJ McCarthy.
I was actually thinking about this when you were doing the Odunze stuff. Like, there's a good chance he could just go number 7 to your favorite team. And
go to the Titans.
And then you just deal with the Odunze family for the next 10 years or whatever.
So JJ McCarthy goes 7 or 8, call it. I think he ends up jumping Odunze, maybe even jumping Bowers. And we're talking about like a really strong top 7 for rookie drafts if that happens. And at that point too, Drake Maye maybe going ahead of him. There could be people that are like, nah, I like JJ McCarthy better than Drake Maye. I could see that happening. The Drake Maye stuff is just people.
I'm not going to get there,
are like hating on it.
Yeah, again, I think it's important to remember that, that's a few fantasy analysts, I would say. Like, everything I follow from, like, NFL draft guys that don't deal in fantasy,
right,
they all say that the NFL loves the guy. I don't see Drake Maye dropping in these guys' mock drafts. He's always top 3. So,
well, Drake Maye is probably a guy, like I said, in that 1.5, 1.6 range that if he starts falling in rookie drafts, trying to trade up to that range sounds like a nightmare. I'm sure it's going to cost an arm and a leg, but if he starts falling in rookie drafts, I'm probably going to be intrigued to move up, because I think that you're going to find a lot of people, kind of like what you're talking about, Brian, where there's people that don't really want to take a quarterback. They know it's valuable. They know that Drake Maye has more value than the other option, but they kind of feel like, I guess I just have to draft him. But maybe you can trade in on the clock for cheaper than maybe like you trading for right now is just like so difficult, and you don't even know who's going to be there when you trade for it.
The other thing I really like about this quarterback class, I was going to mention when we brought up Bryce Young, was Bryce Young always had the historical size outlier thing that he had to overcome, and that combined with he doesn't run a lot like, Kyler or another small quarterback. Like, so he always had like physical things working against him ceiling wise. This class, like JJ McCarthy isn't considered, like, people don't really talk about him like a Konami quarterback, but then like I see he's expected to run like 4.5 40 at the combine. And like, he actually does have a lot of clips where he looks really fast. So
he's just so interesting. Yeah, he's just really interesting, JJ McCarthy, because it very well could be that Harbaugh and the Michigan system were just like, we know we can win by throwing it 20 times a game and running it down people's throats. Or was it that when they faced some of their stiffer competition, his pass attempts went even lower down, like Penn State, where he was like 7 for 8 or something like that for an entire game, but they won. Like, is it a shining star for the coaching staff for finding some type of mismatch, or is it some type of smear on his overall profile? Like, why didn't they trust him enough to throw more than 8 times a game?
I did see that he had a lot of pretty much on par with the other guys. Other guys being like Caleb Williams, Drake Maye, Jaden Daniels, of first down percentage attempts. Let me rephrase that. For percentage of passes on first down. Am I saying that right? I may need to.
I think that makes sense. Like, he threw it as much as the other guys threw it on first down.
Right. And so that's a plus. That's good. So the total team volume wasn't as high. I don't think they were probably running as many plays. So it just,
some of the Michigan stats are crazy. Like, they were leading at halftime of every single game they played. The average deficit at halftime was like 13.6 points. They just ran over even in the college playoffs, they didn't really face competition. I mean, they faced like the best teams, but they won those games pretty easily.
Yeah, that was another one. Was first half attempts. First half attempts, he was basically the same as the other guys. He did play 1 or 2 more games than the other guys, but total attempts, he was about the same as those guys. So I think that the narrative that they didn't want to use him is probably a little bit inaccurate. It's more just that the total volume of the team is lower, and they just were such good at running the ball.
I think he's super interesting. Again, if he gets draft capital, he with a good landing spot, especially, I could see
Vikings.
him a year from now being like the QB1 of the class, and like everyone's saying like, oh yeah, he was my QB1, like that everyone always does. And
people are retroing.
I had him on my list.
The Vikings are such a great landing spot to me, because not only do you have a pretty good offensive coach, but it's the coach in the league that wants to throw it more than anybody. Like, he wants to chuck it 40 times a game. getting JJ McCarthy or any of these guys really into that offense would just be an absolute game changer. Like the guy should probably go 102 just on sheer volume. And I mean, you're playing with Justin Jefferson. It's also not just a volume offense. It's you have a good coach. I don't know if he's like top 5, but Kevin O'Connell is at least top 10 in terms of offensive minds. And then the volume, just another level.
Yeah.
It's like we were talking about with like Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, he's with what's the coach name for the Colts?
Shane Steichen.
Yeah, Shane Steichen. I mean, I like Anthony Richardson. I think that he's like, we saw a couple stud games from him, a couple halves that were stud games, but he gets to be with Steichen, who definitely is a top 5 offensive coach. And that just really feels like the floor is raised for him being with that coaching staff and play calling.
So that's one thing that we haven't really talked about that much on this episode, on this podcast series, is like a lot of the coaching changes this offseason. Brian, like, do you put much stock into that, or like how much do you like raise or lower someone's situation based on their coaching change?
I pay zero attention in the offseason. I don't really pay attention to that stuff in general until I start seeing like some type of trend, like, hey, this is how they're using him or not using him, sort of stuff.
Yeah,
but,
makes sense.
Todd, maybe you dive a little bit deeper into that than me.
Well, just from the volume is one piece. And if I can have a guy going to just an absolute boss of a play caller, like if he's going to, like Achane going to McDaniels last year, that one probably should have been a little bit more of a green flag of, hey,
perfect fit.
Perfect. Like he took him. If he's good, and people thought he was good, this could be a smash spot because of how well they might utilize him.
People had concerns with Achane size and health, so I think those were like two,
which came to fruition. It's like everybody that had to take on Achane could victory lap it in some way after his rookie year.
So like Steichen being like any receiver, even with it being Anthony Richardson at quarterback, like let's say Pittman walks, which it sounds like they may not tag him. If he's gone, they may bring in a new receiver. I think people would have a lot of reservations about that receiver. We've talked about Josh Downs a lot. I'm not really a fan of the player, but him in that offense, I feel like if he's going to be their wide receiver too, Steichen's going to figure out a way to at least make him relevant. So I just think that with the top 4 or 5 coaches, combined with the fact that I need them to have some volume, so like a McDaniels or Shanahan offense, there's a little bit of concern of like passing volume, but there's the efficiency side. You've got the O'Connell method of the volume. McVay, there's a little bit more volume. So
I do think Harbaugh is someone for like maybe like not a red flag, but maybe a yellow flag of like
it's a red flag.
Is he going to come in?
I would be selling my Herbert shares if I had.
The thing to me though is I feel like the efficiency of that offense has been so absurdly bad that I think it should be better and maybe even great. And then the volume will come down drastically. To me, it's probably ultimately just a small drop negative or a neutral move because their efficiency was trash. Like they've been just a trash efficiency team. Like they can't run the ball.
Yeah. I mean, there might be something to that. I just think that the volume is going to drop enough where like that is something where I don't think enough efficiency will increase to make it a neutral. I think it's a negative. Not only Harbaugh, not famously not liking to pass the ball, but then he brought in Greg Roman. I guess he brought in the pass game coordinator for Detroit, which I forgot his name. People like, but Detroit was another team that runs the ball a lot. So I just think they're kind of screaming at everybody, hey, this is going to be our plan. For those same reasons, if we see Corum or another running back go there day 2, they're going to get a lot of justified steam up rookie drafts, I think, because they are going to run a lot. But To me, that was like the untold, or not untold, but like the under talked about storyline from the coaching cycle this offseason. Is I think there was like 7 head job openings. 5 of them were filled by defensive guys. Then you had like the Chargers get Harbaugh. Ben Johnson stayed in Detroit, so Washington, instead of getting Ben Johnson, had to go with Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury. That looks a lot less attractive than it did a month ago. Vegas, kept Antonio Pierce, brought in Luke Getsy. That kind of sucks. Like, we talked about Mayo with the Patriots. So there's a lot of losers from like a fantasy perspective from this coaching cycle, in my opinion.
So I'm looking at passing attempts per game. So the Chargers last year were 37 attempts per game. If we look at like your Green Bay Packers, they were at 33.5 per game, 20th in the NFL. I think that's probably like in that 32 to 34 range, which is just below average. I think is probably where we see the Chargers settle in at. And like 4 attempts per game, if they're more efficient, I think it can neutralize. But I understand. I mean, could it be less? Could it be 30? That'd be a little bit odd given their team dynamic of not being able to run the ball, but we'll see.
So, Matt, you mentioned Herbert's a sell. Is Neighbors a sell if he goes 5 to the Chargers? Or is like at his value, like are you dropping him in your ranks?
No, I wouldn't drop him because I think for his chance of success, the quarterback makes up for that. Like I do think it would potentially hurt his volume, but if they go Neighbors instead of Alt or offensive tackle at 5, that also could suggest that, maybe I'm wrong and maybe Harbaugh is looking to play a little more modern of an offense than we anticipate. But
so are you thinking that they're going to throw like in the bottom 5 of the league type numbers, like Tennessee, Baltimore, San Francisco, Chicago type levels?
I wouldn't say bottom 5, but probably bottom 10. Yeah, I don't think it's. Yeah, I think they're going to.
I mean, bottom 10 is like
32, 33 attempts a game. I could see. I mean, Harbaugh wasn't even flinging the ball when he had Andrew Luck. He even at Stanford, he was running the ball. Like, so, I mean, that's different college versus NFL, but that's the only time. That's the only time he coached what we know was an elite passing quarterback, and he still preferred to run the ball.
I'm less concerned about the volume, but I do think I think it's probably like a neutral move. But Tennessee, I'm looking at the pass attempts per game. Tennessee, 29 attempts per game, 32nd in the NFL. If they can get up to like middle of the pack, that could be a game changer for Will Levis and the rest.
Well, and they're one of the few teams that won, like from a fantasy perspective, in my opinion, because they brought in Bryce Callahan, and like the Bengals were not scared to throw it with Jake Browning. I mean, so I think the owner was very clear about her mandate for the offseason. That was to modernize the offense and, make it a passing type of offense. That's what I expect.
I think one really good buy right now, and it just kind of sounds gross to say, but I think he's like around wide receiver 60, and that's DeAndre Hopkins. I post on Twitter, I think they're more towards the end of the year in the NFL season. I was posting them weekly of like Whopper and PFF receiving grade on one axis, and then age on the other axis. And within like PFF and Whopper being weighted opportunity rating, it's basically target share and air yard share. Hopkins shows up around like that Diggs, Adams, Cup cluster. And if they can increase the volume, Will Levis gets a little better. Maybe the O-line is fixed. Maybe Joe Alt goes 7 to the Titans. That offense could improve, and Hopkins could be like the cheapest version of a Diggs, of a Mike Evans, like those types of guys. Like, because those guys are like top 30 receivers, and Hopkins is like wide receiver 60. A little older. He feels a lot older, but he's really not that much older than those guys.
Speaking of Evans, just recently talking about free agency and stuff, if he is in fact leaving, are there destinations where he lands that he's kind of been like a slept on or like underrated strictly a win now type of guy? Is there somewhere that if he goes there, he is reinvigorated in value?
All right, let's
Just
like think through
Kansas
some of
City.
the options. I mean, like, yeah, like if he goes to Kansas City, my concern is like,
I'd want to sell him probably.
yeah, I probably would too. I feel like he goes to Kansas City, he's probably like wide receiver 20 to 25, and at that point, I don't know that he can return the value. I'm just trying to think like through that the target shares of that offense. I just don't know that he's going to be much more than what he was with Tampa. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking through this one. I would probably have him as a sell, and I don't think that he's probably much different than like Diggs with the
But
Bills.
In terms of perception, then, like Chiefs is an easy one. Are there any other landing spots where it's like you could see where a sell window might open up?
I mean,
Like
Houston is another one that gets rumored because they have the rookie QB. I guess he's from Houston or close to there. I know he played at Texas A&M, but I guess, I mean, because we saw what Stroud did for guys like Noah Brown, but like then you're battling with Nico and Tank Dell, and I just don't know that move makes a ton of sense for Houston. I don't think they need to necessarily improve their receivers. I don't expect him to leave though. Like I think the reason I really have no interest in talking about like Higgins, Pittman, and Mike Evans is because I just don't expect them to leave. I know that move was triggered where like now the Tampa Bay would actually have to re-sign him. He's a free agent, etc. But I would expect him back there still. But I think he's fine anywhere. I mean, people wanted to kind of say he was done with Baker as QB last year. Like a lot of people, there was a lot of comments about how his 1,000-yard streak would end. He had one of the best seasons of his career. So, I mean, Carolina is another one that people talk about as a potential landing spot that will have cap money. They need to give Bryce some weapons. They just hired Dave Canales from Tampa Bay.
That's an interesting one, yeah.
People like that Canales guy a lot because of he worked with Gino a couple years ago during his resurgent season, and then got Baker a lot of money this past season in Tampa. So, if there is some hope for Bryce Young, they did get the most desired QB coach type guy as their head coach. So,
would you rather have Mike Evans or DeAndre Hopkins and the 206?
Hopkins in the 206, I think.
Yeah, same for me. All right, make it the 210, Brian.
Yeah, I would still take Hopkins.
Yeah, I think
that,
Evans.
That one's closer to me. I'm just not. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we'd all rather have Mike Evans straight up. So I mean, if we're getting to like early third territory, like sure, I guess.
Yeah.
I just think you're looking at both short term, potentially high value guys that like there's no reason to want to pay a plus for the other.
Right. I mean, like this time last year, Mike Evans was worth like a mid to early second.
Yeah, the plus would have been on the Mike Evans side probably for Hopkins. Like so, like to Brian's point, they could easily just flip flop again. But a lot of the older receivers did kind of show some cracks in their armor this year, whether it was like Diggs falling off, Kupp getting injured, and then kind of taking second seat to Puka. And then, Devontae looks as good as he ever has, but he's in a terrible offensive environment now, I think. So some of the older guys are starting to show their age a little bit fantasy production wise.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you kind of my like take on the old guys. I may have brought this up on previous podcasts, but I'll ask for your feedback. So my take on the old guys, and you can almost include Mike Evans into the grouping now. So you've got Tyreek. Well, the group of like old good guys. So like you've got Tyreek, you've got Diggs, Kupp, Adams,
Keenan Allen,
and let's call it Mike Evans as well. So my take on the old guys is that Tyreek's a sell. He's ADP right now, wide receiver 8, like on a trade basis, he's probably like in the 10 to 12 range on trading. I feel like he's a sell at that. And we've talked about it on previous podcasts of like, the difference between the points probably isn't as meaningful as we like to think. So I think he's a sell. Cup and Diggs both feel just like mucky right now. Nobody wants them. And so I think trading them away right now is a mistake. I don't know that you're going to get much more than maybe an early second. ADP wise, they're like around that 110, but I think ADP sometimes differs from the trade market. So I kind of have Diggs and Cup as just a hold. And my hope would be that if I had them, could I trade them in season and buy back some years? Or maybe they're just killing and I just ride them into the sunset. Adams is the one for me. And I would include Evans in that with Diggs and Cup. Adams is the one to me that I feel like he is in that like Hall of Fame, Larry Fitzgerald, like just one of the best receivers of all time. And I just want to ride him into the sunset. Like, I feel like he could have another 3-4 awesome years. Obviously, his situation's terrible right now, which kind of is a plus for when you're trying to trade for him. And I just want to have him on my contender teams. My teams are about to be contenders, and I'm just going to ride him until it's over. Right now, he's He's about to be 30. This will be his age 31 season. I wouldn't be surprised if he has like whatever he did this past year. I wouldn't be surprised if he does that again at age 31, 32, 33. I just feel like he's the type of guy that could just last forever because he's just incredibly good.
Adams feels like a lot like Kelsey to me, that it's like if people aren't going to give you what they could potentially be in trade value, then you're better off hanging on to him and just riding until the wheels fall off.
Yeah. Just treat him like he's one of the GOATs at receiver. And yeah, ride him till the wheels fall off. And if I've got a team that's about to be a contender, if I've got a team that is a contender, like I want him on that team. And yeah, we'll just ride until the end. Diggs, Cup, I feel a little bit different about because I feel like any year it could just be over. And obviously this is more just opinion based. Like I just have the opinion that Adams is different. Like he's one of the best receivers ever. I don't get the same feelings about Diggs and Cup. They're obviously awesome. I'm not no shade towards them.
Yeah,
but,
like was discussed in our group chat recently. Like there's levels to this. Like
yeah.
And
I mean, I'm out here comparing Devontae Adams to like Larry Fitzgerald. Like he's on that level that he could go till he's like 36. I don't feel like that about Diggs Cup. And there's been reports that Cup could retire at some point. There's been reports that like Diggs isn't happy with the Bills. Like I just don't have a lot of good feelings about them. From an opinion level, Adams is the guy that I want. Evans, Cup, Diggs. If I can make a move early in the season, pivoting towards a younger guy.
Have you looked at trying to buy Adams yet, or just strictly saying hold if you have him?
I haven't really tried to buy. I've actually been kind of trying not to make a lot of trade offers right now.
Yeah.
I get the feeling that people they kind of want to take a break, and I don't want to show my hand of who I want in my leagues. This is maybe I'm just giving excuses for being lazy. I don't know.
No, I think a lot of people, even the most hardcore people, have taken like a good solid.
Yeah, and so I make an offer for Adams this time of year, and they rejected. Okay, like your first shot, you may not hit it. So we don't make a deal. Well, now again, like closer to rookie season, I make another offer for Adams.
They know you've been wanting him. Yeah,
it's obvious that I want him, and so I think I'd rather wait until maybe like around rookie season to make those offers. Now, if I'm in a chat and like somebody's like, there's an opportunity to make a deal, like okay, I'm not saying I'm not making offers right now.
Yeah,
but for guys like an Adams, where you have limited opportunities maybe to get them, I don't want to show my hand too early.
No, that makes sense. Brian, you said that you had a group of receivers you wanted to discuss. We talked about the old guys, the rookies? Was it any of those groups?
I have a list of incoming rookie receivers that are like a little bit off the beaten path, or a little more off the beaten path. Like I'm thinking like rounds 2 through 4, potentially rookie draft. receivers. So I want to like list off a group of them. I have a feeling you'll at least have heard. I know you'll for sure have heard of one, but there's a group of 6 that I'm curious if you both have heard of all of them. So Roman Wilson is the obvious one that I think
That's my guy.
you both have heard of. Big time hype. I bet you everyone in your league has probably heard of him at this point if they've paid any attention. He was the highlight of the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
I don't love his size necessarily, but if he, if he's good, he's good. I think we've learned that. Okay, so the next 5, I'm curious if you've heard of them. This next person has some name recognition. Brendan Rice.
Yeah, Jerry Rice's son. Yeah.
So
does he happen to have a dad?
He has a dad. Like most people have one at some point. He is semi-famous. He had 12 touchdowns this past year, played with Caleb Williams at USC. But he's also for as big of a pedigree, this is like LeBron's sons, coming through like the draft process. Like he's not being talked about that much. Right? Like for me, I haven't seen a lot of Brendan Rice talk.
Did you see what Steve Smith Sr. said about his route running the other day?
No.
I did see that.
He said he runs routes like Isaiah Pacheco runs the football.
Yeah.
Just like the most determined, like
violent
cuts and everything. So and he said it in a complimentary way. So I mean, it sounds like Steve Smith likes him, but
and
he hasn't been talked about nearly.
He finished the year strong. I think people probably were expecting like a wow type of season with Caleb, and he didn't necessarily have that. It was kind of underwhelming. Scored a bunch of touchdowns. He had 12 touchdowns his senior year. But okay. And then these are the guys that I'm guessing maybe you've seen on. I've seen them talk. I talked a little bit on Twitter recently, I guess. First one being Javon Baker out of UCF.
Yep.
Yeah, I've seen
started at Alabama. Started at Alabama. Transferred to UCF. Didn't really get to play at Alabama. I think he was only there for a year or two, and then popped a little bit at UCF.
Yeah, so he had 2 years at Bama, 2 years at UCF, 6'2". He had his senior year this past year, he had 7 games over 85 yards, like pretty productive in both his UCF seasons. Big, athletic. He's kind of the outlier of this group. Like everyone else is kind of more like I guess him and Brendan Rice are like the outliers in terms of size. These other guys are like more like the little engine that could kind of receivers. A little bit.
Right. So we got Roman Wilson, Brendan Rice, Javon Baker so far.
Yep. Next is Malik Washington, Virginia.
He's been getting a lot of hype. Maybe I shouldn't say a lot because maybe I'm just on Twitter more than a lot of fantasy players, but I've seen a lot of people talk about Malik Washington the last week or so.
Yeah.
So he had a really high PFF receiver grade this past year. Maybe
people are saying he could be like the best receiver no one's talking about kind of label. 5'9", 194, just like kind of a tank. To me, he looks kind of like a running back. So, the automatic like Debo type of style of receiver to me is like something that kind of jumps out. Not a Debo necessarily impact, but to me, like that, he's just like he looks like a running back when he catches it. Physically. So like that, he's just another interesting guy. I've seen a couple people on Twitter really raving about him. Started looking a little bit more into him because of that. Ray GQ being like the notable one that he was like, why isn't anyone talking about this guy? Like, please continue to sleep on him kind of thing. Cause I want him everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's another person to kind of keep an eye out for. Jacob Cowing, Arizona.
Jacob Cowing, I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah, he was at
he's
at
Arizona,
Arizona,
right? He's like the burner type guy.
He's 5'8", 165. Yeah, so he has.
So he better be fast.
Yeah, he's the same size as Tank Dell. And it's funny. I had already had my notes up, and then I saw David Gutierrez tweet about him today and compared him to Tank Dell with. And he matched up his yards per route run, his ADOT, his this and that, and like I think a lot of people default to like, oh, well, Rondell Moore. And, he had double ADOT than Rondell Moore did at Purdue. So, I mean, just and again, he was a transfer. He went from UTEP to Arizona. I think he's just another guy that's like probably going to be slept on. There's all these notable receivers. This is a guy in the, second, third round that you could add on with like low risk, but he could pop for you. Like I certainly don't want people to chase the next Tank Dell because, he could very well be an outlier and attached to Stroud and stuff, but that's another interesting name to think about.
I wonder if I can guess your sixth name.
I bet you can't.
Is it Malachi Corley?
Oh man, yeah, it is. It is.
This is the guy that everybody's comparing to Debo.
He's compared. I've seen a lot of Debo comparisons, and like his ADOT is what, like 3 or some shit. Like it's like a tiny ADOT.
All he did was catch screens.
But he's a yak beast, and like some of the tape matches.
So he's 5'11", 200 pounds, had 29 touchdowns in 3 years at Western Kentucky. Steve Smith again. He said he was the steal of the draft. He looks like a Steve Smith type when you watch him. That's another interesting guy that just kind of keep an eye on. So obviously I'm not as plugged in as Matt is for him to know my topic. But yeah, so Javon Baker, UCF, Malik Washington, Virginia, Jacob Cowing, Arizona, Roman Wilson, Michigan, Malachi Corley, Western Kentucky, Brendan Rice, USC. So those are the 6 guys that I'm kind of outside of the big names that I'm keeping an eye on.
So I'm going to give my overarching, I'm just going to clump all of these guys together, and then I'll let Matt talk about them. But my overarching thought on these guys is that none of them are going to look pretty from a analytical standpoint. Like they're all have their warts, whether it's poor performance early in their career, not doing anything until their senior year, not really dominating on their own team, whatever it is. They all have like their own little warts. But what I'm going to really look to do in rookie drafts with like these groups of guys, and then you can probably add another couple of them, is who are the guys that went in rounds 3, call it 3, 4, and maybe I'll count round 5. And also, who's going the cheapest in rookie drafts? So who's going in round? I don't want to take him in round 2. Who's going in round 3? Who's going in round 4? And then who is going to an offense with high volume or with a good coaching staff? And I don't care about the immediate impact. Like, so like if they go to an offense, like let's use the Bengals, for example. They've got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins probably getting re-signed, and like one of these guys goes there. I'm not worried about the instant depth chart fit. I think that's what happens a lot of times is people are like, the easy one last year was Puka, and obviously it worked out. But like, oh, he's easily going to be able to step in because they don't have a wide receiver too. I'd like to stay away from that because if they're good, they're going to step in. If they're not good, then they're not going to step in. So like whether the depth chart is just like wide open, I don't think is a big deal to me. It's more about like if they are that good and they step in, is the ceiling there, and is the ceiling there with a Kevin O'Connell Vikings team throwing it 40 times a game? That's the type of landing spot that what I'm kind of thinking about. So who goes the cheapest? Who's going in like round 3 or 4? Who goes to those spots? It's kind of like a nice volume. And, combine it with like a quarterback. So like Tank Dell is a good example. He went, obviously we didn't know it at the time, but he went to CJ Stroud. So things like that are probably what I'm looking at from this group, because all of them, you could look at all of them and be like, no, they all suck. Well, 1 or 2 of them might hit. One of them might hit huge. And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it on a cheap basis.
Yeah. Like, what are you investing here? Like, that's the point of this. Like, if I was saying, hey, you should take one of these guys at rookie pick 106, you're going to find enough awards. Right, exactly. You're going to find enough awards to be like, no, that's not for me. This is something that I think a lot of people are always looking for and don't always get enough of in terms of like content or advice, is keep an eye out for these guys. Like, where do they get drafted? How do they do in the combine? All of those different things. Like, is Debo Light, Malachi Corley, does he end up in Miami or something like that, where the coach is going to get him into space somehow? Like, then it's a little more sexy that maybe if people are sleeping on him, you can definitely get some value out of it. Or if he's overvalued, you can sell him for sure.
Yeah, Roman Wilson's always gonna, until the draft, is gonna be my guy from this group. And like one thing I look at that like I think is easy to make fun of, or even easy to make a good case not to care about it whatsoever, is like whatever that dude is going to be in the NFL, I know he's going to maximize that. Like he's just a fucking dog. It comes across in his play style, his interviews, all that shit. So I just love seeing that from prospects, especially ones that aren't like, considered no doubters like Neighbors and Malik, Marvin Harrison and shit like that.
I think it would be really funny to, in like 2 or 3 years, look back and let's say JJ McCarthy and Roman Wilson have both ascended to at least really good player, if not stardom.
Yeah.
And like, the revisionist history of like, man, Michigan's offense must have been dope. Like it must have been fun, like throwing it around like a superstar quarterback, this great wide receiver. And then you're like, oh, they passed 6 times against Penn State and they ran it down everyone's throat. Interesting. Blake Corum, who the hell is that?
Yeah, I mean, Nico Collins was hardly used in Michigan, right? Like, yeah. If I remember correctly, like there was a reason he fell to round 3 or whatever it was. But
yeah, he had a weird career too because he sat out his senior year for COVID. So his senior year wasn't that bad, but then he didn't have a senior year, so it was kind of a weird situation for him. But yeah, he went in round 3.
That COVID year is like messing up a lot of people's models too, from like what I've heard on podcasts and like articles and stuff. Like in terms of, like I know Zoltan's covered this in his preview. Prospect preview pod series, that like a lot of times he's just throwing it out the window if a guy played 2 games that year or whatever. Like
the Pac-12 was really the only one that was a little bit weird where they just played 4 games.
Yeah,
but even that, like if it was your freshman year, like you were still getting some practice, and like a lot of guys don't even play in their freshman year. Like Justin Jefferson did do it. He played 2 games his freshman year. So like to me, that excuse, I'm not huge on it for the player. Like if you're good, then come back in year 2 and be good. Or
right, yeah,
awesome. Yeah, I don't. The excuses are like a little bit harder for me to justify.
Well, yeah, like Jamar Chase sat out. He played sophomore year, then didn't play his junior year, right? Wasn't that the case?
Didn't play his junior year. Yeah. I guess what Matt
he was so good though.
I guess
like, I hardly heard anybody knock him for that. Like as a prospect.
Yeah, I don't think anyone doubted his talent, but it was just like we have one data point versus we would have had a second year of. I mean, he would have been great, but like you could have always made the case of like maybe Burrow made those guys or whatever. I don't know.
So we're talking about like these rookies that the next time they're going to have a chance to affect their draft stock is starting next week, the NFL Combine. Like, do you guys care about the Combine really at all, or like any like a good 40 time will help a running back and receiver with draft capital, but that also can be answered by the data point of draft capital. So is there like anything else that you guys really care about?
Yeah, for me, I care more about the negative things that might happen than the positive. So like if you're talking about like a running back all of a sudden runs like a 4.9 and we were expecting a 4.5 or something like that. Like and this is a bad example because it kind of worked out for him, but like Kyron Williams is a guy that I liked in college early. Then he didn't have a great final year. Then his combine sucked. And then I was like, okay, I'm fully out on him. And now he is, I don't know what he is, but he had
everyone's still a little scared of him, but
he had a great year. That's undeniable.
Yeah, we can say that. Todd, what were you going to say though?
Well, I think it's just a proxy for understanding where the draft capital will be. So right now we have almost no indication of draft capital besides like mock drafts that we see, and that's just really people guessing. The only people that aren't totally guessing, in my opinion, are probably like the guys that are connected to actual GMs and talking to them. So there's a few of those, and then I think a lot of people are just basing their mock drafts off those people. Once we have the Combine, also they all get there and they all talk and they all chatter, and then we kind of get the reverberation of that, then we start to understand what the draft capital look like. It's not totally defined, but we're going to be able to say, okay, we think Roman Wilson will be round 2 or 3, or we think Javon Baker is round 2. He might be round 1. Like we start hearing things like that, and that's what gives us that's what I'm excited about with the combine. So the combine will give us that. And that's why I don't really love talking about some of these guys until after that, because like you said, I mean, a few years ago, you had guys like Seth Williams, who was the guy from NC State? I can't remember his name, but he came out the same year as Jacoby Myers. But he was like supposed to be a round 2 guy and falls to round 6 because of the combine. So that's what the combine is for me, is like, okay, this gives me an idea of what draft capital is going to look like.
Yeah.
I think since like 2014, there's like 5 or 6 guys that have gone in the first round that didn't have a sub 4.540. So that's another little bit of an indicator of understanding of what first rounder is possible. So things like that for the combine are kind of what I'm getting excited about.
Yeah, I never really know like what to pay attention to and what not to. Like I saw someone tweet the other day about the tight end. Pay attention to the RAS score, the relative athletic score for tight ends. Yeah, because like if you look at all the top receiving tight ends this year, all of them had high scores. And like that just makes sense intuitively, right? Like, of course, the most athletic tight ends probably are going to end up, scoring the most fantasy points. But then, like, you had that guy last year, I think his name was Zach Kuntz with the Jets, if I'm remembering correctly, who had like basically a perfect fucking RAS score, and like he's like 6'6" or 6'7", fast as shit, and like he didn't do a fucking thing all year. But people love throwing him at the end of their 4th round drafts. I remember, just because, like, hey, why not? What if he gets on the field? So
it's a lottery ticket.
Yeah, like I think Jelani Woods is another one. So like it feels like there's an equal number of like these high athletic tight ends that don't do shit. So I don't know how much it really moves the needle. I guess if someone
it's
like
not a full indicator, but it's maybe a piece to the puzzle. So
yeah, like if someone like Jatavian Sanders or someone has a bad one, maybe take note.
The guy from his name slips me, but the guy from Texas A&M last year, he was a tight end. He was supposed to be like a 3rd, 4th round tight end.
Was that a couple years ago? That Weidermeyer guy or whatever? It's something Jay Weidermeyer or something like that. I know who you're talking about. And he just completely fell off the map after the combine, right?
Yeah, I don't even think he was. I think
Weidermeyer was in 22. Yeah,
22. Okay,
yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think he went undrafted, and he's just nothing now. And people kind of were talking about him as a 2nd round type of tight end option. So, yeah, I think that's what the combine used for. You mentioned Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams is ADP. Let's see. He's going in the 4th round. Is that right?
Kyren Williams,
4th round, RB6. I saw a poll with him versus the 108, which is going in the 6th round, middle of the 6th round. So they're 2 rounds
the 108
apart.
was like 55-45 over.
Yeah, the 108 was leading versus Kyren Williams, which to me was a little bit mad. I think either Kyren Williams is undervalued or the 108 is overvalued, in my opinion, or like ADP is jacked up. There's some sort of inefficiency going on there. I'm starting to think Kyren Williams is starting to get undervalued a little bit.
Yeah.
Based on the ADP at round 4, I don't know that that's true. Maybe he's undervalued on the trade market.
We've talked about this a lot. Yeah, like trading for win now or viewed as win now pieces right now. You can't win a championship right now, and people aren't thinking that way. So I think it's probably a lot more voters on the front of long-term and rookie fever, I would guess.
Mm-hmm. And that's what KTC
like the classic Family Guy, like it could be a boat kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I mean the community in general is as biased against running backs as they ever have been, and like, man, it takes a lot to get that day 3 stink off you. Like Aaron Jones, it took multiple years for people to start trusting him. I remember that personally.
It's pretty crazy for him. He looked the part like right away.
Yeah. And he didn't have like some of the small and slow stuff that Kyren
who was the guy that he replaced? It was like a semi-notable running back. I thought.
Well, I don't know if they replaced Eddie Lacy or if that was a little bit earlier, but Jamal Williams was drafted in the 3rd round that same draft, and he was from BYU, and he was supposed to be like our lead running back, and Jones is like the compliment. But both of them worked out. Jamal Williams was still a good 3rd round pick. I mean, for what he was, but
all right, before we wrap things up here, I'm going to pop this on you guys as a question. I'll go first to try to give you a little bit of time while I filibuster. So whether it's trade or startup ADP, what's your biggest buy player right now? And so I'll go first, and mine's going to be a little bit lazy. I'm going to do 2. So my first lazy one is DeAndre Hopkins. I think he's a great buy for old teams, like a 211 or 212 is what he goes for on Fantasy Calc. So that would be my buy. But as far as like let's get some of the meat and potatoes and do a good fun buy. I'm gonna say pivoting to Caleb Williams, pivoting off of Hurts, Lamar, maybe not Hurts. Let's say CJ Stroud, Lamar, Burrow, Herbert, Anthony Richardson, and going to Caleb Williams. I don't know what that looks like on the trade market exactly, and that's something that I wouldn't probably looking to do like today. But I think it's probably something to keep an eye on as you get closer to rookie drafts. People don't want to trade their 101 in February, I don't think, unless they're just getting a smash deal. They want to be able to do something fun, like either leading up to the draft or on the clock. So I think what I'll be doing is just kind of like keeping an eye on that 101 pick, because I'm starting to wonder if Caleb Williams is getting undervalued due to just prospect fatigue.
Yeah, and even if it's not necessarily true, people will think that if they wait until the week of the draft to trade that pick, or the day of the draft, or while on the clock, that, okay, I waited till the right time to trade this. I'll maximize the value. And it's like, well, maybe your partner would have given you the same exact thing 2 months ago. But yeah, I agree waiting to make that trade. The only problem I see with it is I don't know that you're going to get like a plus that would make it worth it.
That's the problem. I think you're right. That's the problem. Like if I have Herbert,
it's worth trying. I mean,
yeah, if I've got Herbert, what am I really going to get on top of Caleb Williams to make it worth it? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's worth, like you said, it's worth trying though, and just kind of testing the waters.
I'll give a group of 3 buys all at the same position. To me, all buys for similar reasons, but a guy you made fun of earlier in the podcast, Pop Douglas, Dontavian Wicks, and Khalil Shakir, I think are all similarly priced, and they're all 3 cheap young wide receivers that I would look to get with, as a throw on to a different, like the tier down that you're talking about. Like if I'm tiering down at quarterback or a different position and I need some pluses to make up that difference, maybe I throw in 1 or 2 of those guys and maybe another piece or whatever. But
you said
those
Wicks,
are 3 guys I'm looking to buy everywhere.
Wicks, Demario Douglas, and who else?
And Khalil Shakir on the Bills.
Okay, so Wicks is going right now ADP. I'm just looking at ADP sleeper the last 3 weeks on Dynasty Data Lab. Wicks is wide receiver 49. Demario Douglas, also known as Pop Douglas, wide receiver 52. And Khalil Shakir, wide receiver 57. So, yeah, I think I've seen Dontavian Wicks go for a 206 and a 208 in 2 separate trades over the last couple weeks.
I got a trade offer last week that I was like, what the fuck is this guy thinking? He offered me Amari Cooper for Wicks in the 110. I was like, is Cooper even worth the 110? I was like, hey, and he must think that I fucking hate Wicks or don't even think he's anything.
This is embarrassing. Amari Cooper was one of my buys.
Oh, there we go. I like it. I like that as a buy.
I like it as a buy too, just not for
not at that price.
But
yeah, my buys, Amari Cooper, got him in the 9th round of a startup. I think Joe Mixon is an interesting buy in like round 11, 12.
Do we think
so
that
like
he
that's
is returning to the Bengals?
I think he is going to,
Okay.
but I didn't really dive super deep into his like contract status in terms of like if they are relieved of a certain amount of money or whatever. But to me, he's good. He's another one of those guys that I'm probably just kind of riding until wheels fall off, which could come soon. But I don't think you're paying anything near what he could be worth short term.
Tony Pollard
I,
or Joe Mixon?
I'd rather.
ugh. Yeah,
They're back to
I
back in
think.
ADP.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
they're
think
back to
so.
back in
But
ADP. Man,
Yeah.
Mixon's a sell if they're back to back in ADP. I think.
I think that's people just diminishing what Pollard could still be because they're so sour on what he wasn't this past year.
What
But
about Mixon? What about Mixon or James Conner?
Mixon.
Okay.
But James Conner was going a round or two later in startups.
2 rounds later.
I looked at, yeah.
Interesting. I think I'd
So
rather.
like if I could get 2 rounds, I mean in theory you could get both of them, and then just a like a little bit sexier of a thing. And we were talking about rookies. I'm buying 107, 108, where I can, and trying to package like a late one. Like if I just won the championship or was in the championship, 111, 112, and let's say I have a 25-2 or something like that, I'm trying to package that in to get into 108. And it's partly for the reason I think there's some good receivers, but also the JJ McCarthy emergence is, like we talked about, is probably coming. And it's going to either have him be there or push somebody else back that we were already tearing up as this tier of 6 or 7. So,
Yeah, it does seem like that tier of 6 or 7 is becoming 7 or 8, and then, like we've talked about it in previous episodes that me and you are. I think all three of us really are interested in buying late firsts in general, because then, let's say you have that, and then Xavier Worthy goes to Kansas City, and then that's a tier of 9, and then Brian Thomas goes to Buffalo, and then that's a tier of 10. Like it could easily happen. It feels like some potential nut landing spots aren't necessarily being priced into like 109, 110 yet. So
yeah, I'm excited
this
to talk
first
about
round
some
is
of
going
those
to be exciting.
receivers, Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy after the combine. So just to kind of give you an idea, Brian, of the players you mentioned of where they're at, like draft capital wise on ADP. So Mari Cooper's between the 201 to 202. Joe Mixon is between the 204 to 205. And you mentioned the 108 as a buy, as a thing to buy. That's kind of like between, let's say, Ken Walker, Jaden Reed, James Cook, Barkley, those type players.
yeah, I'm definitely selling a couple of those guys for 108.
Yeah. The players ahead of the 108, I'll just read them in order really quick. Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, JSN, Jordan Addison, DK, Kyle Pitts, Deshaun Watson, Ken Walker.
Yeah, I would sell a lot of those guys for 108, but
I would take the player, I think almost all of them. Maybe not Jordan Addison. That may be the only one.
I think I would prefer 108 over Addison and Flowers, honestly. I don't. I'd rather re-roll. I think Flowers and Addison are going to be like pretty solid, but I don't see the star potential. I guess just me personally, that's a hunch.
Kind of thinking like, all right, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like their career rounds 5, 6 type players, and you're re-rolling to hope that you can hit a round 2, 3 type player with the understanding that you might roll again and get a round 10 next year, for example.
Yeah,
is kind of to just kind of take the risk.
It's the thought process that the win now guys hate, but that's how I think. When if you're not gonna get a star out of it, try and get a star. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean I think Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison, from just like a warp, just like a wins over replacement player value perspective, they're pretty replaceable. Like you can, if things get dicey, you can go and get a DeAndre Hopkins or like a Marquise Brown and get some sort of backfill to that type of guy. Now, maybe those guys turn into rounds 2-3 players. Who knows? But
They could.
I get the process of what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm selling Watson for the 108, but I know I'm on an island here with that one.
So on my Twitter, I've had trade for so-and-so a bunch. So like in the past, I had trade up for Jamar Chase. I had trade for our friends Noah Fant, Rashad Bateman. Had trade for T. Higgins. I've had a few of them in my bio on Twitter.
So you're hitting about 500.
I would make it to Deshaun Watson because I think he's just a massive buy right now. But I don't want to get canceled on Twitter. So just know that if I had my own choice, I'd probably just make it Deshaun Watson. But round 5 or 6 for him is kind of crazy to me. I don't know if this is accurate, but I saw someone on Twitter say up until the game where he got hurt and played like 12 snaps or whatever, he had the same points per game as Patrick Mahomes. I don't know if it was accurate or not, but it was like 18.3 points per game. I assume 4 points per passing touchdown league. So
yeah, I saw the same. I saw the same tweet. I'm assuming it's accurate under some kind of settings, but yeah, I mean, Mahomes had a pretty disappointing fantasy season, like
he's also
by his standards.
QB2 in the world, and Deshaun Watson's in the what is this? The 7th round, 701 is where he's going.
Yeah,
sorry, he's going to 601.
But I mean, yeah, Jacoby Brissett and old ass Joe Flacco ran the offense better the last 2 years. That's eventually going to become a concern.
Comeback player of the year, Joe Flacco.
Yeah, playing for the Jets is more to overcome than dying, according to the voters.
Classic.
All right, so that wraps us up.
Yeah, I just have one thing I want to get off my chest. Jaylen Brown's tribute to D. Brown in the dunk contest was as bad, if not worse, than Doc Rivers has been since 2009.
Man,
just outrageously bad.
Couldn't even jump over.
If you didn't see it, he covered his eyes when he landed, not while he was dunking. Outrageous.
All right, that wraps us up. Thank you for joining the Dynasty Market Watch podcast presented by the Bulletproof Family Podcast. We'll continue to be back every week this offseason. We're getting super close to the NFL Combine like we were talking about. Once that hits, we're going to start talking about these incoming rookies more. Some of these rookies that Brian was talking about today. A lot of the guys like Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas, we're going to hit on a lot of those guys. You can find us on Twitter. Brian is at Brian_O'Leary1. Matt is at Dynasty Peasant. I'm Todd at Dynasty SFlex, and you can find me in the Bulletproof Discord. The podcast account is at Market_Watch1. Do us a solid to go give that a follow. Would also really appreciate a rating and review of the podcast on Spotify and Apple. Thanks for joining.